Welcome back to Previously Prohibited. I'm Janine Yunus, here with my co-host Melissa Whitty, and we're thrilled to be joined today by Sulaiman Ahmed. He joins us from the UK. He has quite an impressive resume. He is a journalist, an influencer. He has a massive following on Twitter as well as YouTube. And he has a smattering of degrees that I can't even keep straight. Math, philosophy, law. So he brings all of his insights from his background to this podcast. Mel and I have both been following him for a long time and we find his insights about the Middle East especially to be very interesting. And so we wanted to bring him on. Thank you so much for joining us, Sulaiman.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yes, real quick, if you guys could hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave us a comment below, and we'll try to reply. I know I got a couple that I have not replied to that were really long, so maybe we could just keep them a little shorter. One of them's got 10 different bullet points. I'm I can't go here with you guys right now. But yeah, so we're so excited to have you, and we wanted to talk to you today about what I think is quite possibly the number one, definitely the most underreported story in the world, but probably the most important story in the world, and that is what is going on between the Trump administration and Iran, and the nuclear deal, because Iran is not having it, right? They have decided that, Trump came out, he was really wishy-washy with Witkoff. Witkoff signaled that they would allow enrichment. Trump then came out and said, no, we're not going to allow enrichment. They want to put limits on the enrichment. The Iranians basically are saying, screw you guys. We don't care. We're going to enrich our own uranium, and we're not going to stop, and we're not giving up our ballistic missiles either. So Trump doesn't really have a whole lot of leverage here, and he drew the line in the sand. He said 60 days. It's been 60 days, and still there's no deal. So what's going to happen? And so I wanted to get your perspective on what you think the Iranians, what they want, and what you think that the U.S. and the Western countries in general can do to kind of meet in the middle.
Yeah, I think it's a great question and an important question. I think from Iran's perspective, first of all, they've got to balance it. Because if they were to completely remove the uranium enrichment and make sure that they don't have that capability, it's a huge risk. Because you've seen in the past that, unfortunately, when it comes to the United States, and specifically the Trump administration and Witkoff, they can't truly trust their word. So you saw, for example, Gaddafi in the past, who agreed to, denuclearize, give away his chemical weapons, his WMDs. And what they did was, as soon as he did that, or not as soon as he did that, but not too far long after that, they attacked him and they removed him, and Libya is in chaos since then. Furthermore, if you look at the actions of the Trump administration and Steve Witkoff specifically, he had a deal with Hamas. Initially, the first deal was that they're going to release the American Israeli prisoner, which we really know is Israeli. He serves in the Israeli army, but okay, let's take it that he's an American.
Yeah.
Because if Israel and America's views don't align, or their motives don't align, or the benefits don't align, whose army would he serve? He would serve the Israeli army. But okay, they agreed to release him, and the idea was that we'll release it, but Witkoff gave his assurance that they would work hard towards a ceasefire, and then Hamas felt like he broke his word and they were duped. Then you had the ceasefire agreement. Hamas and Witkoff agreed to a ceasefire agreement, a multi-staged agreement, a temporary ceasefire for 60 days. It's all agreed. It goes to the Israelis. The Israelis change the agreement, and then it goes back to Hamas, and Hamas are like, wait a sec, that's not the agreement that we agreed with Steve Witkoff. Why has the agreement changed? And then Steve Witkoff came out and said, oh, why are they not agreeing the agreement? And so what they have is this experience in terms of Hamas, but also Iran is viewing this, of the Trump administration going back on its word. Furthermore, you see the US in the past also going back on their word about the specific instance. Now, why I'm explaining that is, from Iran's perspective, if they were to completely remove all nuclear capability and nuclear facilities, they basically can open target for Israel. Let's say Israel decide to bomb them, what they're going to do? There's no deterrent. Israel has a nuclear weapons to stop any form of advanced attacks. And so the only way two countries are able to stop attacks one from the other is when they're both nuclear capable. India and Pakistan recently, they're both nuclear capable countries, and therefore the chances of them going into an advanced, elongated war was extremely low because of the nuclear capabilities. the thought is, on some reporting says, that the part of the reason why the ceasefire was so quick in the India and Pakistan situation was India were concerned that Pakistan were going to use nuclear warfare, and therefore they didn't want to have to retaliate and have that situation. So this is what nuclear bombs do. Either nobody has them, which is obviously my preference, but when people have them, they become a form of deterrence. So from Iran's perspective, I think they would be completely stupid and illogical to agree to denuclearize completely and not have uranium enrichment. So that's like the one step that one needs to consider before we look at this. Now, in terms of from the Trump's administration, they want Iran to completely remove everything. I just can't see a scenario where Iran agrees to that, like based on what I've said. So, like, what form of agreement will there be? Likely, what could be a form of agreement, and even then, this is why I find it hard. Like, would be like enrichment is allowed up until a certain point, definitely for nuclear capabilities that isn't weaponry, and then anything after that, maybe it can be something where it's allowed to happen, but under the observation and roadmap that is allowed by the United States of America, that or observations by the US. That could be the only way. Or other than that, I just don't see how they could agree to it.
Yeah, I have trouble with that. I ended up last week going down a nuclear and uranium enrichment rabbit hole, kind of learning what it was, learning, what all went into it. Because we always hear, number one, there's no peaceful reason to enrich past 5%, right? That's what we hear all the time. That's a very common talking point. Well, turns out that's actually not true. A lot of reactors, certainly if you want to have a nuclear submarine, you have to have highly enriched uranium. That's what's used to power those nuclear submarines. But also there are research reactors in a lot of medical research that also use 20% uranium, which once you enrich uranium to 20%, you are 90% of the way to a nuclear bomb. Right. And so it's fascinating because once you get to that 20%, it only takes about, from what I understand, 6 to 8 weeks to get all the way to 90% enrichment, which is what is needed for a nuclear bomb. Now we know that Iran has enriched to 60%, and they have something like 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, and that to take it to 90% would take about 2 weeks. They have all the supplies, they have everything necessary, because once you start enriching, you need a lot of centrifuges to start, and then the higher the uranium is enriched, the fewer centrifuges that are used, right? So it's not like, we could take away some of the equipment. And that's why Israel is so adamant on no uranium enrichment whatsoever, because there's no way to stop it once they have everything in place, right? So I think that just the fact that we're even talking about this is, I don't know, I think it's silly, because they're never going to agree. And why would they agree? Israel has 200 nuclear warheads, and they have never once submitted, they don't even admit that they exist, and they have never submitted themselves or subjected themselves to any sort of regulations. And what do they say? We're a sovereign country and we can do what we want. Well, I think that most people would say, well, Iran's a sovereign country and they can do what they want as well.
Yeah, I agree with you what you said. In terms of them being 2 weeks away, I think it's a bit more than that. But what you said is completely right. In terms of when you look at uranium enrichment, to go from 60% to 100% isn't as hard as going from 20% to 60%. The time scale it takes and the ability is a lot less, for sure. The issue you've got is you have to remember there's two parts to it. The first is that actually the Iranians had agreed with the previous regime, with Biden, with Trump, that they wouldn't enrich, and they agreed to that. They actually followed those guidelines, and they weren't enriching uranium. And so when Netanyahu and Israel were making this claim that they're very close to a nuclear bomb, they've been saying this for decades, and it was never the case. The escalation in terms of the enrichment has only happened now because of Israel's kind of actions since October the 7th, where they've been unhinged. They've been very illogical in the sense of from a geopolitical world perspective, but very from a personal perspective. Obviously, they've been looking to just harm anyone who they consider to be a threat to them. Now, from Iran's perspective, like let's say hypothetically Iran did have nuclear enrichment. That doesn't harm the US. Because it's not like the nuclear bombs can go to the US. They don't have them capabilities. That's like advanced capabilities. Mm-hmm. And so really, if you look at it, the only person, let's say in the worst case scenario, let's say Iran was this evil regime and they wanted to harm and all these kind of things. The only people who they actually are a threat to is either Israel or the GCC countries. And so this idea that America is having to risk their own soldiers or their own people or their own lives or their own peace for a foreign nation is highly problematic.
Well, and that's been the whole purpose of the Israel lobby, is to try to conflate the interests of America with the interests of Israel, and it's been a highly successful effort. I think people, over the last year and a half, people are starting to have some questions about whether our interests are really as aligned as they claim, but it's been a long, slow shift.
I mean, it's been sold to us since the 1950s in the U.S., and I encourage everyone, if you are bored one day, to go read the State Department cables on the Near East from the 50s and the early 60s, and you can see in which initially, obviously, we had a arms embargo on Israel all throughout the 50s, and then when the Cold War really kicked into overdrive, late 50s into the 60s. You saw Israel kind of position itself as, we are the only democracy. Everybody else is communists, right? Now, once the Cold War ended, we switched to, we're the only democracy and everybody else is radical Islamists, right? But it's the same talking point, and that they are they're the wall holding back the communists or holding back the Islamists, protecting us, right? They position themselves very, very well in this. And of course, it's all nonsense. And if you go and you read the cables from the Near East in the 50s, you will see that there was a time in the U.S. that our politicians actually didn't buy that and they're like, actually, geographically speaking, they're not really positioned to defend us from anything. And
not have the pride, because if you look at when the U.S. has gone to war for Israel, whether it's the Iraq war, whether it's the Afghanistan war, Israel hasn't supported at all. And in reality, even though those wars have happened for Israel, if you look at the Middle East, this is like a psychology that they've created. It's part of the propaganda they've done against Muslims and the Middle East in the West, in the UK and the US, because if you go to these countries, you'll see that actually they very much are pro-America. Lebanon, almost, if you look at its lifestyle, is very much mimicking that of the United States of America. And a lot of these countries, and you look at the GCC countries, they're literally almost try and copy and replicate the United States of America. Each part of their cities are built on almost reflecting New York or Miami or wherever it may be. And so when you look at the psychology of these people, they don't have no issue with the United States of America. This has been created as a false dichotomy because of Israel. And if Israel wasn't in the picture, they wouldn't have any of these issues.
Exactly. I was just, I mean, to the extent they do have an issue with America, it's because of the, unequivocal support for Israel and its violations of Palestinian human rights and others. I mean, actually, it's not just Palestinians.
Yeah, because an Iraqi child, even though he knows this war is for Israel, is just seeing an American soldier kill him. And so in their mind, that's the reason why they see America as the enemy, even though those who politically understand what the situation is and are not within those regions in the sense of going through being killed on a daily basis or in a war zone, that the reality is a lot more complex. And so people in the Middle East, and the GCC is a proof of that. If you look at how pro-America they are now, you've got a deal, what was $4.2 trillion with the United States of America, demonstrates that as soon as Israel doesn't view you as an enemy and try and demonize you, actually a lot of these countries will do deals with the United States of America, which only benefits America. So if you look at the United States of America, they're receiving $4.2 trillion from the GCC as opposed to giving millions to Israel.
Yeah, I know. That's why I always try to, when everybody tries to go against Qatar and whatnot, I'm like, we actually get something out of our relationship with Qatar. They host the largest military base in the region. They buy our weapons and we don't pay for them at all. We don't forgive these loans. They actually just pay cash for the weapons. It's a very equal partnership, right? They have, of course, they joined us in the fight against ISIS. They sent soldiers into that alliance, whereas Israel was the only country in the entire region that refused to combat ISIS in Syria, which I've always found to be interesting. But now, did you see this recent Al-Qaeda video that just dropped yesterday? Because the only people I saw pumping it were hardcore Zionists, right? And it just seemed really, really convenient. You've got Laura Loomer on the timeline threatening a 9/11 every, 16 hours or so. She's saying there's going to be another 9/11. And then all of a sudden you have this almost caricature terrorist guy come out. He's with Al Qaeda, I guess, in exile in Yemen, kind of thing. I didn't quite understand, even though when I was reading about them yesterday, they said that the Saudis had actually been using this faction of Al Qaeda, which is also an offshoot of ISIS, to combat, to fight against the Houthis back in 2018, 2019. So, do you know anything about them, and what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so again, let's be clear on this. Al Qaeda is a US Israeli invention.
Yeah.
And it was there to basically fight in Afghanistan, initially against the Russians, and then later, a lot of them are like CIA, American Mossad assets. The same with ISIS. If you look at the rebellion that happened in Syria, that was very much perpetuated, funded, and caused by the US and the UK, as well as obviously Turkey and a few other countries were involved. So ISIS and Al Qaeda are definitely, and this is confirmed, like if you look at the WikiLeaks and Clinton and this US support of ISIS, it's very clear on that. So when you look at these groups, you see who's behind it. And if you look at Jelani was someone who was ex-ISIS member. He got promoted, and now they've got to deal with him. So when you understand this, you see that like what ISIS and Al Qaeda, just logically speaking, these are people that they trump out, and a lot of these extremists are where they'll trump them out in order to demonize Muslims, but really they are puppets, or they are basically agents. And so if you look at Al Qaeda and ISIS, why is it, if these people really are about Muslims and support Muslims, why is it they've never attacked Israel? They're in the exact same region, they're in the exact same area, yet they've never ever attacked Israel. And if you look at the actions, as you mentioned, whether it's in Yemen, which is attacking the Houthis, or for Saudi and the United States of America, a 10-year war where many Yemenis suffered, and basically they lost, the Houthis won that. And or if you look at, for example, in Syria, or if you look at all these other regions, these are very much, they're attacking other Muslims. They're attacking other Muslims, and it's Muslim on Muslim crime. And it's to cause revolutions, color revolutions, to basically overthrow someone like Bashar al-Assad, who was anti-Israel, or to overthrow, for example, fight with the Yemeni Houthis in Yemen. Even though if like Yemen, the Houthis were dominating, even after 10 years they won in the end. They took control of the entirety of Yemen, the vast majority of all the major cities. And so when you understand that, you understand this is a psyop. And so that Egyptian guy who allegedly has links to the Muslim Brotherhood, you see that in reality, what he did was kind of illogical. It made no sense. Maybe he had mental health issues, I don't know. But it just seemed like it didn't make sense in what happened if you look at the scheme of things. And I do think that there is some kind of psyop happening there. Because the way they promote and perpetuate, like the video you're talking about, like these are just isolated videos. They don't mean anything. They're behind a camera, and they could be anyone. What we do know is in the United States of America, in reality, although they've made this argument that Israelis are under threat, and we know the 2 people from the Israeli embassy that were shot, okay, that was an incident, but again, that person, from his perspective, saw them as being IDF agents, being part of because the guy was part of the IDF, and they were part of the embassy. But if you look at in the US, there's actually people who are pro-Palestinian, or actually Palestinians who have been physically assaulted, physically attacked, whether it's the 3 students in Vermont, whether it's the 6-year-old child. And so when you understand this, you see again that this is just drama, it's propaganda, perpetuated by the right wing. You mentioned Laura Loomer, she's one of them, and various other Zionist right wing, or even left wing accounts. So if you look at the 6-year-old child, when they did the propaganda, because at that time when the 6-year-old child who got killed, who got stabbed 25 times by his landlord, who had a good relationship with his landlord before. So what changed? He had an extremely good relationship with him. Well, just a few days earlier, leading up to that, Twitter, Zionist Twitter, and that was both left-wing and right-wing, so Krasensteins were involved in that, as was Laura Loomer, as was any Zionist, whether left-wing or right-wing, were all talking about the idea that there was going to be a jihad day in the United States of America, which was fake news, which was propaganda that was perpetuated to demonize Muslims and cause fear. And the result of that was, so I'm not saying it was a direct result, but I did mention this to Krasensteins and they got upset, but the possible environment that they created did result in that kid being stabbed. So in reality, this whole idea or notion that's happening where they've created it, and why I mention it is because they use that the video as well as the Egyptian guy to make this claim that Jews are under threat in the United States of America is complete fallacy, and in reality, it's the other way around.
And it's just incredible how they have this selective outrage. I mean, I don't think, I actually asked ChatGPT, not a single conservative political figure, with a large following or huge public figure, said anything about the stabbing to death of Wadi al-Fayyoumi. It's a focus, and America, there are violent incidents that happen every day. to take two incidents that occurred against people who were, clearly showing affiliation for Israel, and say like this is indicative of a Muslim violence is so insane. I actually can't believe anybody buys this, but I guess people are pretty susceptible to propaganda.
Well, the biggest example of that was, and Laura Loomer is a good example of this, but all of the right-wing Zionist Twitter they perpetuate to be pro-Trump, they perpetuate to be pro-MAGA, right? And they perpetuate this idea that they're pro-America. Yet that Israeli, I forgot his name now, the Israeli guy who was from the US, they claimed he was US German, but he was actually Israeli. He lived in Israel. He was a Jewish Zionist. He was planning to bomb a US embassy in Israel, and he was planning to assassinate the president of the United States, Donald Trump. Yet none of them tweeted about it. Now imagine this was an Iranian guy. Imagine this was a Muslim guy. This would have been all over the news. They would have said Iran's a threat. They were trying to assassinate the president of the United States. Yet we have direct tweets by this guy, direct posts by this guy, where he's saying death to America, he wants to blow up the US embassy. He was planning to assassinate President Trump, and he was planning and had planned to bomb up the US embassy, and yet none of them spoke about this. So this once again shows and neither did the mainstream media. So they called him a US German guy, the US media, the mainstream media did. So just demonstrates again this kind of fallacy.
Joseph Neumeyer, Neumeyer, if any of the listeners are interested in looking that up. Yeah, because you didn't hear about it on really on anything, right? And of course, we hear all the time, Iran was plotting to kill our president. I mean, they literally say that all the time. And of course, because there was supposedly some Iranian national, I don't even think that they actually arrested him. I think they just charged him. And he is in fact in Iran, who supposedly reached out. They never had to actually present any evidence about this. All they had was the press release from the DOJ telling us that there was an Iranian who wanted to do this. And yet now, we've got this guy who was arrested in Israel. He was a tri-citizen. I think he held a U.S. passport, but perhaps not. But he definitely was German, definitely held an Israeli passport. And apparently he feels that Trump is not doing enough for Israel. I don't know what else Trump could do for Israel. But, I know what they want us to do, but you're pretty much short of putting boots on the ground in Iran. Trump has done every single thing that Israel has wanted. So I don't know. Some people just can't be pleased, but you're right. Yeah, that got swept under the rug right away. And then, of course, we got this nut job out in Colorado. I think all of these people are crazy, by the way. I actually don't hold I do believe in the lone wolf. I do believe that people can just be insane and they can snap and they get fed a lot of propaganda. I think that guy out there in Boulder, the Egyptian out in Boulder, was insane. Like, he clearly had a mental health break. Neumeyer probably had a mental health break. So did the boy in D.C. I mean, it happens, And I try not to use tragedies like that to score political points online. But it is frustrating when you see that one side just goes balls to the wall every single day with it, and then something happens that is not favorable to their narrative, and just how effective they are at sweeping it under the rug and ignoring it all.
Well, and there's this incredible, incredibly successful propaganda campaign to make it seem as though Muslims and Arabs just hate Jews. So that, I know a lot of like boomer conservatives who really believe this, that, Palestinians especially just get up in the morning, they hate Jews, they don't love their children, they just hate Jews. And I've tried to have conversations with them where I'm like, that's not what's going on. Like, half my family is Palestinian. I assure you that they are not, like, their main thing in life is not hatred of Jews. They don't like living under an occupation, like most people wouldn't. But it came out the other day in this interview with Piers Morgan. I don't know if you guys saw this. I forgot the guy's, it was a Palestinian guy who was explaining, no, they don't hate Jews. Like, that's not what led to October 7th. It's occupation and the siege of Gaza. And Piers couldn't believe it. He was like, no, they just hate Jews. This is just about anti-Semitism. And the Palestinian guy who was being interviewed was responding, well, there wasn't a problem before 1948. This stuff is, or really 1967, there wasn't, this is clearly the result of an occupation, and Piers couldn't get it through his head. It's just this incredibly effective propaganda.
Well, it's fake news, because this whole idea about like Judeo-Christian being one combined idea is something that was created after 1945. And in reality, if you look at it historically, actually Muslims and Jews actually had a very good relationship. If you look at the Spanish Inquisition, it was actually Muslims who probably saved Jews from basically being eradicated at that time. And if you look at it historically, it was always Jews and Christians who actually had the problem. So if you look at them being thrown out of a significant number of European countries, if you look at the fact that there was issues between them, it was always between Jews and Christians. So this whole idea that basically Jews and Christians were one and Islam was the other was actually not true. In reality, Jews and Muslims had a good relationship, and it was Jews and Christians who had a really bad relationship. And it wasn't until the Holocaust, basically what happened in the Holocaust, which was basically Hitler, who was a Catholic, when they had that issue with the Jewish people, and I know it wasn't just Jewish people, but the point is, when that happened, after that, there was a huge change or shift. And you basically had it where the conflict occurred, as you said, because of occupation, because the only reason there was this issue between the Palestinians and the Jews was because of Israel and the occupation. Or in reality, before that, there was never an issue. And before that, it was actually always Christianity and Judaism who always had that issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some pretty obvious conflicts that you can find or right there in the old Bible as to why there would be issues between Christians and Jews, right? And we won't go there, but yeah, especially with Catholics in particular. And I've noticed that a lot of, whenever I see a lot of tension going on, theological tension, it's always between Jews and Catholics, which is kind of funny. Not really, but it is if you are a Protestant like me. So yeah.
I agree.
It's very frustrating because, like you said, it's all a psyop, right? It's and maybe not necessarily a psyop, but it is narrative manipulation used to control the masses and to get us focused on things that are just not important, or things that are not necessarily a threat to us, like this dude over here, and I guess he's filming from Yemen is what we're told, and it's just some random guy, and maybe he's the leader, but we can't even confirm that what he is of this group. But you do start to wonder when these videos pop up, because supposedly he said that he wants to attack the U.S., or he commands people to attack Americans because of our support for Israel, and he's doing this for Gaza, which is like, I'm watching this and I'm like, well, you haven't done jack for Gaza. You know, why would you be attacking America? Again, like you said, why wouldn't you be attacking Israel? That makes no sense. Unless you were trying to draw the U.S. into a war in the Middle East.
And to I agree with you, and to demonize Muslims. So if you look at it, this video that was released is something that's been happening over the last 25 years during the war of terror. So after September the 11th, the aim was to demonize Muslims. Now people may think, oh no, this is not true, this is a conspiracy theory. It's not. If you look at the various NGO groups, if you look at the various lobby groups, they were funded to do this very thing, which was through the media, through government policy, to demonize Muslims. So if you look at, for example, the Henry Jackson Society, now a lot of American listeners are aware of Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray was part of the Henry Jackson Society. He was significantly funded by Jewish Zionists, and the aim of the Henry Jackson Society was to demonize Muslims. If you look at the right wing in the United States in the UK, it was to demonize Muslims, and so it was to say, oh look, Muslims believe in these kind of extreme positions, whether it's anti-feminist positions, whether it's against LGBTQ, whatever it may be, and so therefore these people cannot mesh with the West. And so again, it was to demonize Muslims, and then you'd have this kind of extremist outlook that happened as well. Well, and by the way, there was some forms of elements of extremism. I'm not saying this didn't exist. They exist, but they were promoted and perpetuated, and they became almost the presenters of Muslims in the West in order for them to maintain their goals and get to their goals. And the aim was always that you put a video out that I like this out, you create fear and panic, and it manufactures consent against Muslims, and then in the Middle East, because people think, oh wait a sec, the Middle Easterners are terrorists, therefore it makes sense that you want to invade them or bomb them or kill them or whatever it is. And examples of that is like Iraq and various other countries in the Middle East, Afghanistan. So this is done intentionally, and it's done through lobby groups, it's done through institutes like Prevent, it's done through organizations like Quilliam Foundation, which we spoke about earlier, which is Majid Nawaz and Tommy Robinson. So this is like an actual policy, and I believe in the US it's called the Gateson Institute, which is another one. There's so many of them, which are NGOs, lobby groups, which basically intentionally do this to demonize Muslims. Now, the video that you mentioned, in the past 10, 15 years ago, would have caused a huge amount of disarray, would have caused a huge amount of tension. But in a way, it doesn't work anymore. Since October the 7th, people are a lot more aware of things. People are aware of the psyops. And if you look at it, it didn't actually hit or impact as much as things did in the past. So I think their kind of strategy is failing.
I think that too. Like I thought, so when I saw the about the shooting in DC at the Jewish Museum, I was like, oh no, this is going to be used to for something really bad. But I was kind of pleasantly surprised that people actually didn't seize onto it. And I think a lot of it has to do with social media, because people like us can push back and like make the point that like actually violent incidents happen every day. Palestinians have been the victims of them. The media can't create this sort of selective outrage by just not covering things, because we know about all these other things from social media. So in that way, I think there's been a major benefit to sort of the modern social media landscape.
And to be clear, what happened in DC, of course, was a tragedy. It was. It was very.
None of us are pro shooting innocent people.
Well, no. I mean, it's just like it was. But I felt like it was. I mean, they tried. We know that they definitely tried to manipulate the narrative and exploit this tragedy, this obvious tragedy that happened. And some of them are still trying with that one, definitely. But yeah, you're right. It did get shut down pretty quickly, or people just weren't buying it. And unfortunately, that's in large part because we see babies getting blown up every single day, right? I mean, we have, in some ways, have been desensitized. And I guess maybe that's good to a certain extent. And I hate to say it like that because I think it's terrible. I don't think it's good at all. But it definitely makes it much harder to manipulate us with graphic imagery.
Well, the thing is, and I agree with you. First of all, I disagree with vigilantism. Like, I think that everything should be done based on law and order.
Yeah,
but
of course.
Part of what happened was people recognized, it doesn't make it acceptable, but they were part of the Israeli government.
Yeah.
The guy the male had basically been part of the IDF. They see the IDF, as you said, blowing up babies, killing babies, acting in the way they were, insulting, degrading, demonizing Palestinians. And so even though what happened was bad, but people it didn't have the impact that it would if it was just like an innocent person as well, like an innocent average person walking down the street. And I think that's where there was kind of like a situation. But by the way, I disagree with vigilantism, is irrespective of who it is. I've written about it in the past, irrespective of the race, religion, or creed. But because of whom it was and who they were connected to and who they were working with, I think did minimize the situation.
And the attempt to paint it as just like a random anti-Semitic incident, as though they just walked into a synagogue and shot a bunch of people, didn't really work, because I think people were able to say, well, actually, this was really about Israel. And again, I don't think any of us condone violence against innocent people. Absolutely not. But putting it in context and perspective and understanding it is important. And I think another indication that this sort of failed was the House the other day was again voting on like their 8,076th resolution against anti-Semitism. And the initial draft had included something saying, after the attack in Boulder, free Palestine is an anti-Semitic slogan. The resolution that ended up passing removed that part. So it was just, it was a neutered form, like condemning anti-Semitism, which I think it's silly for Congress to be spending all its time condemning anti-Semitism, but... Yeah,
22nd resolution since October 7th, which is just...
But you see the irony of that, right? This is the right wing. The right wing who insulted the left. And we're like, oh my God, you care about identity politics, you care about racism, you care about this, LGBTQ, you're all about your feelings, and you're all about, protecting, we've got free speech, we're allowed to say what we want, we're allowed to insult anybody we want, this is America, we have the First Amendment. And now the very same right wing is trying to censor people based on what they call anti-Semitism. You're seeing people being arrested by the way, I agree with them when they say about the UK. The UK is turning into a police state. It is anti-free speech. Many of us have had major problems in the UK because of what we've been speaking about in terms of Palestine. But that being said, when Americans say it's not true because in the US you're doing the exact same thing, but you're doing it for a foreign nation. If you speak out against Israel, you got Mahmoud Khalil, you got Ramesa Oztak, all of whom had been arrested, and they said nothing against Israel. They'd even demonstrate that they love the United States of America, and yet these people were being rounded up and deported. You saw, for example, Trump sent a letter to Columbia University asking him to adopt the IHRA definition, which is an extremely loose definition, which means that if you believe very minor things, like you believe that the Jews killed Jesus, or if you're a Christian, or if you believe that a person has more loyalty to Israel than the United States of America, which is my view on a number of people, including but not limited to like Laura Loomer, or for example, you believe that, for example, the world or certain governments treat Israel better than other governments. For that reason, you could be expelled from university. That is crazy. In the United States of America, you could be expelled even though you've maybe lived in the United States for hundreds of years. Maybe your parents came in the Mayflower, whatever it may be. Despite that being the case, you're going to get expelled for having those views. So I think US is basically demonstrating the right wing.
Those lawsuits are coming. So hopefully the courts will not uphold those, but they are they are being challenged. But yeah, absolutely. And we just had this. There's now DOJ just filed a lawsuit against coffee shop owner who refused to serve a guy who clearly came in to provoke him, all dressed up in Jewish
Israel
Star
flag.
of David, Israel flags, like it was, I think, a Palestinian-owned coffee shop. And the guy said, he supposedly said, are you Jewish? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Then he was like, are you a Zionist? And refused to serve him. And in the complaint, they're saying, oh, there's a drink called Sweet Sinwar. Like, I'm sorry, you're allowed to name your drinks whatever you want in the United States of America. Yeah. And this is by the same DOJ that's, said that they're going to restore free speech in America since Biden had censored people. It's just incredible, the levels of hypocrisy. And by the same group of people who want to be able to refuse to serve gay people, which should be your right in America.
Right. Yeah.
I was just about to mention that. If you remember the big case, the birthday cake incident in the United States of America, where a religious Christian woman did not want to create a birthday cake for a gay couple because they went against her Christian values. And the Supreme Court ruled that forced speech is something that you can't do to an individual. So basically, she can't be forced to express something that she disagrees with. And so this was part of the Supreme Court ruling. So again, like, I don't know how the whole, because when it comes to Jews, obviously that is maybe into hate speech because it's the same as not serving black people. So that does fall into it. But if it was because of the position on Israel or ideology or religion, then it becomes a bit more murky and it could become very much more
I think it's clear he didn't serve the guy because of his beliefs. Because he said, are you Jewish? And then followed up with, are you a Zionist? And this is supposedly. This is like what they're alleging. I mean, I think we've seen a number of incidents where Jewish students, etc., have claimed that they were discriminated against on the basis of being Jewish, and it turns out it's because they were like going up to pro-Palestine students and saying, I hope your whole family in Gaza dies. And then they were like, can you go away? And they're like, oh my God, anti-Semitism.
Right. Yeah. The Civil Rights Act definitely does not cover your political affiliation at all. I have actually personally been denied service because I was wearing a Trump 2020 shirt back in 2020. And it sucks. But oh well. I mean, I was happy to not give those people my money at the end of the day. I've never understood this. Why would you want to give money to people who don't like you? It's very weird. But now, in the UK, though, you guys are actually, you don't have the same, like, kind of, at least it's certainly not in the populace. You don't have the problem where the population is, like, in love with Israel, I don't think. It's always been a little bit skeptic, right? But your government is still very supportive. And I'm guessing that probably ties into, like, the intelligence communities, the Five Eyes, Mossad thing. There's a lot of work, a lot of cooperation between the two. What is the political climate like for you guys now?
So you're completely accurate in what you're saying. The vast majority of the UK, significant majority of the UK, is anti-Israel, is pro-Palestine. It's huge. So remember, if you think about the UK, our adult population is about 35 to 40 million. On one weekend, we had 1.3 million people turn up to a protest against Israel and for the genocide to stop. So when the UK itself is extremely pro-Palestine, the pro-Israel position is very much like the Tommy Robinson far right. And obviously Tommy Robinson has links to Israel and Mossad. Now, the reason the government is controlled by Israel is the very same reason you guys are as well, which is just like you have APAC and J Street and so on and so forth. In the UK, we have Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel, these lobby groups that basically ensure that the politicians are controlled. Furthermore, just like in the US, it's not just directly in terms of politicians, it's because of finances, it's because of agreements, it's because of, like, you're not going to have a career unless you're not supported by them. For example, in the UK, we had someone called Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn was a socialist. He was someone who the people basically went for and got him elected, to the extent where there was such support for him, they didn't want him to be the leader of the Labour Party, but everyone joined Labour and basically made sure that he became the leader of the Labour Party. He was going to win the election, and it's only when people like Rupert Murdoch and the, again, Zionist media came out and made false allegations of anti-Semitism against him that they ensured that he never won the election and that he was dethroned for their pick, which was Keir Starmer. He never said anything anti-Semitic, and actually it was a bit weak of him to be like, look, if I did offend anyone, I apologise, and he kind of did an apology, even though he never did anything. And before October the 7th, if you were accused of being like an anti-Semite, it destroyed your career. Now it's kind of like, people are like, oh, they just do it to everyone who disagrees with Israel, and it's kind of, the power's gone, but the power was there at the time. And so what they were able to do was supplant him with Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer was a Zionist pick, and he's actually their choice. And the reason they did it is because in people's mind, people think Labour is left, even though Labour is not left. So they made sure that a socialist didn't win. Keir Starmer is more right than anyone in the past. He's more right than, I don't know, who can I give an example of? He's probably as right as a Trump in terms of from a ideological political perspective. But then they can use him because people in the left have voted for him because they don't want the far right parties, such as the Conservatives or Reform or various others. And so it gives him extreme amount of power. So a lot of the policies they're putting in, which are extremely pro-Israel, a lot of the policies that he's putting in, which is against the minorities, a lot of the policies he's putting in against immigrants, are very much right-wing positions. But because he's doing it, people are more amiable to it. And so what they've done is in the UK is create a kind of environment where even though he only gets 35% of the vote or 39% of the vote, he got 67 or 70% of the seats, because what the Zionists did was they split the right-wing vote between the Conservatives and Reform. And then I believe, my prediction is they're going to do the exact same thing with Rupert Law. They'll split that vote even more to make sure that Keir Starmer stays in place, because he was their choice. He was groomed to replace Jeremy Corbyn. He's a Zionist. His wife's a Jewish Zionist. His children are Jewish. And so in reality, he is the guy who's going to be put in there to create these policies that demonize and take UK even worse. The anti-free speech rules. Like, people in the US complain about, oh, there's no free speech in the UK, which is true. But the vast majority of anti-free speech is actually against pro-Palestinians. So if you look at it, people like Richard Medhurst, Sarah Wilkinson, Asa Winstanley, all of them are pro-Palestinian who are being targeted, and it's being targeted for their pro-Palestinian stance. If you look at the people who are far right who've been targeted, it's not because of their pro-Israel stance or their anti-immigration stance. They actually did things that were problematic. So in the UK, we've had riots in the past. This isn't unique. We had riots in the 2000s between blacks and whites. People were put in prison for like 10, 15, 20 years for the riots. We had the Bradford riots, which were between basically Pakistanis and the white population. People were put in prison for 10, 15, 20 years. This time, these riots, actually the sentences were much less. So if anything, if you look at historically, the sentences were much less. And the people who got charged with people like Lucy Williamson, I think her name is, where she said, literally were telling people to burn hotels. She was like, go to hotels, there's migrants there, and burn them. That is like, you can disagree with immigration, right? Which is fine. I think there's problems with immigration, both legal and illegal. We don't have that much illegal immigration in the UK, but even legal migration, it's happening in significant numbers. It's happening from India, not from Muslim countries, even though they try and perpetuate this idea. It's mainly from India, China, Nigeria, which is the immigration into the UK. But that being said, she was literally, you could disagree with immigration. She was telling people to get burn people alive. Like, of course that's a crime. That's like inciting violence. But those are the people that they complain about and say there's no free speech. But in reality, they do have free speech. The people who are being attacked by the government for free speech is pro-Palestinians, and they're doing it through Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I followed it a little bit, but you guys, it's been pretty quiet on that front, right? Since last August, I believe it was when you guys had the big immigration riots, right?
Yeah, the last riots were last year. But then the only reason it was quiet was because they didn't have an opportunity, a catalyst to create something. So as an example, we had the Liverpool car attack, which was major. People thought he was a migrant, and if that had been a Muslim or a migrant, then we would have had riots again. But it ended up being like a 50-year-old white man, so therefore things fell down. But if it hadn't, there would have definitely been riots.
Yeah, which it should clue everyone into how easily, it is to kind of herd people into a certain, and make things happen. And I think that's what we've been trying to say again with these ICE riots out in LA. Like, the right obviously sees people burning down businesses, setting cars on fire, waving foreign flags. That's bothersome. I get it. Trust me. I mean, it is bothersome for it, just wanton violence for no reason whatsoever. But the urge to usher in this kind of security state to come in with the face scans and and really expand the power of Palantir, which is of course the giant surveillance company that Trump just contracted with, to use AI. What are they going to do with that? And you have to kind of wonder, like, who's pushing these riots? Who's really kind of driving it, and why? And you have to resist their urge to restore order at all costs, which I think is what is how a lot of this totalitarianism gets ushered in so quickly.
So I vehemently agree with that, but there's 2 points. The first is, again, this demonstrates the hypocrisy of the right, because they've complained about riots, which I agree with. I disagree with riots completely, because if you look at whether it's the BLM riots, the UK riots, any form of riots, generally speaking, it's the poor working class areas that get harmed. It's people aren't going to Beverly Hills and burning it down. People aren't going to Kent or Oxford and burning it down. People are going to like Sunderland, Atlanta, poor working class areas, and the only people who suffer is working class areas. The businesses that are burnt down are poor working class businesses. In the UK, during the UK riots, it was like bakeries, UK bakeries like Greggs, where people were breaking them down and nicking sandwiches, or it was like, for example, or Sanis as we call it, or they were basically people, but like one was like a recruitment center where the people were getting jobs, and that was burnt down. So I vehemently disagree with it, but it demonstrates the hypocrisy of the right, because they actually support riots when it's their own people. So even if you look at the right wing in the United States of America, they were promoting and perpetuating the riots in the UK and supporting the right wing in the UK doing the riots. Furthermore, the Jan 6 riots, like, you can disagree with the deep state attacking people or not giving people trials, which I agree with, that they should have been given trials. They should have been given a fair conclusion, fair opportunity to fight legal cases. That being said, though, there were people who were aggressive. There were buildings that were being hit and attacked, and yet they try and minimize that. So again, it demonstrates that there's a hypocrisy where it's like one rule for us, similar to the free speech issue, and a different rule for others. And now they complain about business being destroyed, but they were supporting that previously. So that's the first point. The second point, I agree with you. I think these riots are fake. I think this is some of it's happening. But if you look at it, a lot of it is being promoted and perpetuated by social media and making things sound worse than they are. Yeah. So if you look at Chicago, people were writing and protesting peacefully. There was a huge number of people yesterday in Chicago protesting. Yeah. If you look at some of the right-wing accounts, they were like, "Oh my God, there's riots. They're gonna take over the Chicago. There's gonna be craziness." And they were doing this in a lot of areas. When if you look at it, even in LA, other than the day before when they were burning those Wyoma cars or whatever they're called, but last night, it was quite peaceful. Like, people were stood there, the police were there, there was a curfew, the police brought a bus in. It wasn't as bad as this. So first of all, I think it's been exaggerated. Second of all, I do agree that maybe it seems fake. And in the reality, the reason is either A is misdirection because of the Trump-Musk fallout, or, which is more logical or more reasoning, is because they want to bring in a surveillance state, as you said, totalitarianism, authoritarianism, and basically have it where everyone is being surveilled. They did this with the Patriot Act after September the 11th, as you know. They said, "Oh, look, we need to surveil the terrorists." And then they used it against American citizens without telling them. Yeah. They're going to do the same thing with this. With Palantir, it's not just surveillance. It's not just a social credit score. They know every single thing about you. They profile you. They know every single individual thing about you. They've basically helped with drones. They've helped with the development of drones Palantir has. And they've basically tested this against Palestinians in Gaza. And so in reality, how far this goes is because of the AI technology is significant is they'll know where you are right now. And let's say they think you're a big enough threat, they could just take you out. And that's the risk that you have, that when you agree to this kind of control that happens, which is much worse than even the CCP or any other country that we used to demonize in terms of the way they treat the public. This is significantly worse. You look at Palantir is controlled by Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is someone who put J.D. Vance in power. He created J.D. Vance. He made him the VP. He's likely going to be the president of the United States. Epstein funded $40 million into Palantir. All of these people are interconnected with Israel Mossad, with Israel. Palantir is connected to Israel. They're controlled by Israeli intelligence. Their founder is a Jewish Zionist. And so when you look at all of these things, it's significantly concerning because it's all for a foreign nation. It means, let's say there is a president in the future in the United States who maybe doesn't agree with the Israeli policy, they can just take him out. So this is much more big or significant than anything we've had in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really hard to overstate it too. I think, we saw Alex Karp last week, kind of, I don't know if you guys caught that MSNBC interview with him, and he's just like throwing his arms up and he's just acting very erratic and whatnot. And it was so funny to me because he kept saying, I asked somebody to go through that New York Times article, because the New York Times ran a piece on Palantir and how they were basically this kind of super villain that was going to be scraping all of our data and building profiles on every single American, which is exactly what they are going to do. And he's like, I asked my tech guys, how many inaccuracies can you find in 90 seconds? And he said 15. And then this guy said 20. And he said, I think a good person could find 50 inaccuracies. And then he doesn't list a single thing that was inaccurate in the article, right? He says, they said we do this, but we don't do that. And then I went and I read the article, and I'm like, actually, the article doesn't say that you guys are going to be conducting the surveillance, because they actually don't do that. What they do is they gather all the data points, put it into, and then they build profiles, which are then used by the government to surveil you. Right. So it's a couple step process. And and now they've been given access to the IRS. They've been given access to Social Security Administration. They have all of our health records. They, of course, have combed all of our social media. Anytime you put a picture up, they're doing digital scans every single time that we upload a video on social media. And make sure you're not putting your kids' pictures out there. If you put your child's pictures out there, even as babies, apparently they are able to predict what they will look like. Wow. With just a few pictures, being able to do facial scans and bone scans, which should terrify you. I haven't put a picture of my daughter online in about 5 years. And still, now I'm like, but it's too late now that I know what they can do. That they'll always, they have her, they know exactly what she's going to look like. And so they've already built her own profile, right? And you have to ask yourself, why would the government want this, right? And it leads into, there is no good answer for it. It's all nefarious. It's all about controlling us and being able to herd the masses.
Yeah, I agree.
And like we always say, everything that they try or that they want to do to us, they test on Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. And we've seen that. And Palantir, of course, their technology has been used. They have a program called Lavender, which has been used to, it's an AI prediction targeting platform that they essentially predict that this person is Hamas associated because they are studying like their geolocation, their social media posts, their affiliations, where they worked, everything like that. And then they'll put up a probability of how much, this person is 92% Hamas, right? There's a 92% chance that this person is associated with Hamas. And then they have been, the IDF has been using that data to execute people since October 7th, just left and right, blowing up entire families to get the father or whatnot. And everything that they want to do on us, they test on Palestinians.
Yeah, I agree.
So any hope, or do you guys think we're just inevitably headed for a totalitarian dystopia?
I personally think that they are very surprised by the pushback and they don't know what to do. I do feel like there is a bit of a little bit of a well, shit, what do we do? Kind of attitude. You can tell they're scrambling. It's a constant deflection, constant chaos all the time. And but is that slowing down the machine that's running in the background? I don't know.
I mean, I doubt they'll slow down. I mean, I think if you look at Theo Vaughn's interview with J.D. Vance, which I give him a lot of credit for, he asked him a really good questions. He did ask about Palantir, and if you look at J.D. Vance, he tried to deflect it. If you look at the fact that J.D. Vance is their choice, their VP, and then he's going to be the president of the United States, I think they've got carte blanche to get the contracts they want. They've got carte blanche to get the to go the direction they're going. So even though we speak out against it in social media, they're kind of just ignoring that. You see that with, for example, the lack of free speech in the United States. Many of the things that people are calling Trump out on, which they're aware of, they just continue to go down that road. So in reality, I don't think they stop, because this is the direction they go in. This is going to benefit them in terms of having that level of control. The government has always been, generally speaking, wanting to create more control, and it's always been the people who stand out against the control, and it's always up to people to kind of stand for their own autonomy. And that's why in the US you have the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, with this idea that the government tyranny can happen at any time. But what happens is, because people are like, oh, we've got the Second Amendment, but it's not that. It's that they manufacture consent. So if you look at it, they've tried it through these riots where some people are already becoming more amiable to Palantir. But it's not worked to the level that, I agree with, they've not worked to the level that they want. But I think they'll just continue ahead with it.
And I mean, if you don't have candidates to vote for, I think that's one of the problems in this country, or at least the elections are so skewed because Israel money or AIPAC money or whatever. We really, people just tend to vote for the name they know, and that's somebody who's AIPAC funded and who's in on all of this. Then what do you really do? I mean, we can scream as loud as we want, but if our elected representatives are essentially representing the interests of another country and other people, there's really not a lot of hope. Sometimes I think about moving to Mexico. I don't know, but maybe they'll just do the same thing there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Sulaiman.
This was really good. Yeah, it was really a pleasure to have you. Can you let people know where they can find you on YouTube and X and so that?
Yeah, of course. You can find me on X. It's Sheikh Sulaiman, SHAYKH SULAIMAN. And on YouTube, you can find me on Sulaiman Unfiltered. That's the YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok.
Yeah, and I'll include all the links at the bottom or in the comments so that people can check you out. Okay.
Awesome.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.